Well, Chooms, I think Heywoods may very well be the best district in all of Night City when it comes to well-made gigs across the board. Every single entry here definitely has at least one really cool detail going for it, and they all add some great colour to the wider world. So without further ado, let's dive right in with a detailed look at all the hidden secrets and subtle connections of all 12 Heywoods gigs. First up here is a gig named On a Tight Leash, and this one really does cut deep, potentially having major implications on the lore, and even feeding into some of the points I discussed in my recent deep dive on Yorinobu Arasaka. From the outset, it doesn't seem too special. A classic revenge gig. A Valentino named Jose Luis shot dead an NCPD officer, but rather than getting arrested, somebody from way higher up the corporate ladder covered the whole thing up. So, still wanting revenge for their buddy, some other NCPD officers have hired us, a solo merc, to go in and kill the guy who's somehow avoided the apparently short arm of the law. Heading inside then and dealing with the other Valentinos as we see fit, we'll find Jose on the top floor. Before that though, down in the garage, we get our first clue as to just how deep this conspiracy runs.
Can you spot the two things that don't match?
Give up.
Hint 1, Militech. Hint 2, Valentinos.
With Militech convoys in the garage, you'd be in your right to assume that it's Militech covering up for this guy. However, you would be wrong. As a side note, there's also several terminals mentioning the funeral of Gonzalo Rivero at the La Catrina Funeral Home, a place we'll venture to for another gig a little later on, where a different funeral is taking place. Come upstairs though and take out Jose Luis either alive or dead, and we can learn a bit more about the guy. Turns out, whilst performing as a regular gangoon by day, Jose takes care of his grandfather, Roberto Luis, as well. Seems like Roberto has a bad habit of being rude to his caregivers though, and I'm guessing he just wants Jose to become his full-time carer. However, Jose's too busy raising money for more carers by taking a job from Arasaka. That's right, at the monitor on his desk, spinning full screen, is an all-too-familiar logo, and on the terminal, we can see that they've issued him a last warning after killing the cop, threatening to kill him if he becomes a liability again. The details of Saka's plan though, now that's particularly screwed up. See, the Militech equipment is to be used by Jose and his goons to attack one of Arasaka's own facilities and making sure to inflict fatalities. Now, you might be wondering, why in the hell would Arasaka want to kill its own people under the guise of Militech? Well, turns out Padre can shed some light on that.
Arasaka? You're telling me a megacoon was involved in the killing of some ordinary beat cop?
Joffrey's death was an accident. Jose was covered for another reason.
I'm still listening.
He and his crew were hired to launch a full-blown assault on an Arasaka facility, and do it using Militech equipment.
Attacking Arasaka on Arasaka's behalf. Shit. You need to get out of there.
You know more than you're telling. Spill.
I'm just speculating here, but
Out with it.
there's a good chance that Arasaka's looking to pick a serious fight with Militech. Maybe even all-out war.
And? Jose's hit was meant to be their excuse? Kinda slim, don't you think?
It's not just Jose. I've heard of other cases. Same MO. This runs deep, V.
But why war? You're still picking up pieces from the last one.
No bigger smokescreen than war. Maybe they need the attention of something else.
Not sure I even want to know. You, Padre?
Not this time, no. Not my board, not my game. See you around, V.
Yeah, be seeing you.
To add to this then, we know from the main storyline that Yorinobu pinned the death of his father on Militech. Now, whilst Yorinobu is actually arguably a hidden hero in this game, as I discussed in this recent video, it does appear as though he's trying to start a fifth corporate war between Arasaka and Militech. The question is, why? And I have two theories. One, he's still hell-bent on destroying his father's corporation, despite now controlling it, and a war would be the perfect way to cleanse with fire, so to speak. Or two, Yorinobu, now about to gain control of Arasaka, seeks to use his newfound position to eliminate what he sees as another tyrannical corporation as well, thus turning Arasaka into an anti-corporation corporation. Ironic, very much so. Whichever the end result, the same intention is clear. Spark an all-out corpo war on the false basis that Militech shot first. I guess in some ways then, Yorinobu is almost as anarchistic as Johnny Silverhand dropping a nuke in his tower. Much like the Perales questline though, this is a gig that alludes to something much bigger than us, and there's literally nothing we can do here, though whether or not you choose the devil ending will ultimately have an effect on events like these in future canon. Overall, on concept alone, I'm gonna name this one an absolute S-tier gig. And actually, I'm just glad a gig with such wide lore implications is a rarity. Makes it more special that way. Oh, and it was pointed out to me that I forgot to add the one Pacifica gig to this list as well during the Pacifica video. Now, that one wasn't majorly special, though there were some interesting tidbits, so for that, I'll add it now as a B-. Now, with most of the gigs in Heywood being based around the Valentinos, you might hope that one or two mentions of our best chum Jackie Wells would come up here and there. Well, in the gig 5th column, you're in luck, so long as you played the hero's side quest, that is. The objective here is to steal some dirt on a mayoral advisor named Javier Alvarado. According to some media woman who approached Padre, he's been embezzling money on the Valentinos' behalf, and she wants to bring this to light. Now, I've got a pretty good idea who's actually behind this, and no, it isn't the media. Just outside where the gig takes place is an assault in progress involving Militech and a lot of body bags. The whole operation going on here was to extract one Gerardo Estevez, who allegedly has information pertaining to Javier Alvarado and his link with the Valentinos. The extraction was unsuccessful, though they did get to scan his brain, which may be where this intel came from. Why the hell Militech are involved in this is anyone's guess, but what is clear now is that this gig is actually part of a Militech power play, and we're, therefore, nothing more than a cog in the political machine. But the Eddies are good, so let's go do our job. Coming back from the El Pinche Pollo restaurant where we're sent to steal the data, we'll see a Valentino in this window. Useful detail to remember for later. Head inside the restaurant and ask the barkeep whether he knows anything about Javier. Of course, being a man of honor, he divulges nothing, and who can blame him? Best part of this gig then can be unlocked by coming over to these stairs behind. This guy, Ernesto Muno, is one of the bouncers here, and he's taking none of our excuses. That is, until we mention we were a friend of Jackie's.
I know you from somewhere. Hey, hold on, weren't you a friend of Jackie's? I saw you at his funeral.
You knew Wells?
We were tight, him and me.
Jackie fucking Wells! Guay was like a brother to us. Mourned him once when he left the Valentinos. Second time when he... Come on, let's get a drink. To Jackie.
Everyone wants to drink to Jackie in this game, and it's honestly one of the most heartwarming and wholesome things in this screwed up world. And yes, looking back at Heroes, we can indeed see this guy in the crowd at the Ofrenda. Night City really ain't so big after all. We'll have our drink to Jackie, and Ernesto will leave us up here, telling us not to cause trouble. After this, getting to the terminal we need is very straightforward. If you didn't do Heroes though, then the most direct course of action is to come up the other stairwell, taking out this one guard. Knock out the camera by these two doors, and inside the one on the right, we can find evidence of Javier's shady dealings on a shard called the Laundromat. Reading this, it looks like Javier Alvarado has been pulling strings at City Hall, allowing the Valentinos to buy up businesses wherein they can launder money, then taking a cut for himself. Now, go through the door on the left, taking out this guy on the phone, and it's plain sailing. On the terminal is one message from Senor Ladrillo, the owner of the Dicky Twister Club, and someone who'll come up in another gig a bit later. But nice bit of foreshadowing. Then we can find a message directly from Javier himself, expressing interest in working with the Valentinos. Of course, we've still got to do the whole stealing data wire action, but it's nice that we were able to actually read what some of the evidence is for ourselves as well. Johnny will point out that the political system is a rigged game and that all politicians are corrupt. Classic Johnny is probably right again. Now, you can leave back through the club, but there's not really any more interactions to be had there. So, for a quick exit, just hop out the window in this room that we saw earlier and get congratulated on your flawlessness. And for any gig that has us drink to our fool and chumba Jackie Wells, I've got to awarded on that alone another S tier. Life's Work is yet another gig with a lot of cool stuff connected to it. Rather than the Valentinos this time though, we'll be going up against 6th Street to steal a Thornton Colby Butte truck from a garage on behalf of Jake Estevez. He's a techie that's an absolute genius when it comes to cars, and this Butte in question, whilst looking like any other, has seemingly been heavily modded to become utterly untraceable. Extremely valuable to many, as I'm sure you can guess, in 2077. We can also see untraceable cars as a service he extends to others in fact, with one Florentine Valentino Z, requesting the same treatment for his company car. Now, fair warning when heading in here, if you haven't completed the side quest Stadium Love yet, that's the 6th Street Party shooting contest, you might want to make sure to do this one stealthily. If not, you'll get recognized at the end of Stadium Love and have no choice but to shoot everybody there. It may not be a problem for you might have been planning to shoot them all anyway, but it is a really cool bit of world flavoring and just something to be aware of. The car is sitting right here, but of course Jake has locked it up tight behind some software encryption, so in order to drive it away, we'll also have to access the computer upstairs and upload a virus. Now, you may be wondering at this point who exactly Jake Estevez is, and why his modded car is parked in a 6th Street garage. So here's the thing, Jake actually owns this garage himself, with business running swimmingly. His last job involved doing up this car for 6th Street, and that's when he met a particular woman. Lupa Dolores is the wife of one Joaquin Dolores, but she is far from faithful to her 6th Street husband. She's been engaged in an affair with Jake for the past however long, and Joaquin, finally finding out, seizes control of Jake's garage. In fact, reading the shards from Lupa are pretty funny. For somebody who we only encounter through text, she's got a lot of character. If we take out Joaquin at the garage, we can read a shard with her promising she's not having an affair with Jake. Then, by reading the upstairs computer, we can see she's contacted Padre and is requesting his help in saving Jake from her husband after he's uncovered their affair. I guess it was her then who commissioned this gig, and she doesn't want her unfaithfulness to result in the death of another lover. You see, over in Vista del Rey, atop a fire escape of a food shop building, is the body of one Gustavo Berger, and on his body, a convo between him and Lupa Dolores. See, he's arranged to meet Lupa by the fire escape for an encounter with him and Mr. Stud, as well as a stamina booster and gag, it seems. If you want to pause the video and read this one, then please do. It's pretty funny. But obviously, as we can see, the two got caught, and Gustavo met the wrath of Joaquin.
Police, get what you fucking deserve!
But that's not going to happen to Jake. Clap his car and return it to him, and he'll tell us he plans to leave Night City at once, selling the thing along the way.
It's like Uncle Estevez always said, if you gotta choose between your ride and saving someone else's ass, always choose the ride. At least you know that a ride's never gonna betray you. People, on the other hand,
By the way, remember the Militech assault in progress with the body bags relating to the previous gig? Well, since the guy they were looking for there was named Gerardo Estevez, I don't know, it's a possibility he could be the uncle, or at any rate a relative of Jake, but who knows. Anyway, a few days after the gig, Jake will text you with an incredible gift. The Turbo RV Tech may not have as much control as other cars, but it is an absolute powerhouse, and it also sounds and looks awesome. Defo one of the best cars in the game in my opinion, and if you want more info on it, and every other ownable car, check out my Cars Ranked video. As for this gig though, with the Little Affair storyline, Stadium Love tie-in, and most notably the car we later get, it comes together, in my opinion, to form our third in a row S-tier gig. Jeopardy is a gig which takes place at the La Katrina Funeral Home, and I really like the setting of this one. It's already been mentioned several times before in shards from other gigs. For example, Jotaro uses the place to dispose of bodies, though that may be inaccurate because according to the database, it definitely isn't a place used to cover up nefarious deeds. And obviously the database never lies. So the reason we're here is because we need to retrieve an important shard from the deceased Jim Greyer, before he's, cremated. This guy had a history of smuggling unstable shards inside his own head, but sadly, this time, the shard in question was just a little too unstable. It's a pretty straightforward retrieval objective, but there's some awesome details and cool ways of going about it here. So first thing, and this is a really awesome detail which annoyingly I can't see because of my generally non-lethal approach, but any of the big names you've killed in previous gigs should show up on this terminal here. People like Big Pete, Jotaro Shobo, and even Gustavo Orta, who we'll get to next. So you might want to return here each time you complete an assassination gig lethally for a little extra world flavoring. Anyway, getting through into the back where the body is kind of difficult, with both doors being guarded by Valentinos. Now, of course, we don't want to start a fight here, there is a funeral going on, and we ought to behave out of pure respect for Alberto Ruiz. Okay, whichever developer came up with that is just genius. And what's more, the door is now left unattended. So, take the lift or the stairs down to the basement, stealthily take out the couple guards, and collect the shard. Now deposit it nearby, and congratulations, you've disrupted a funeral and disturbed the dead. Now, only thing that I'd have been interested to get some expansion on or crossover with in this gig is the funeral of Gonzalo Rivero, who was mentioned multiple times back in the Tight Leash gig. Though, I guess death is all too common in Night City, and it does kind of make sense having a different random funeral taking place here at this point. Overall, the gig doesn't do too much, though that cool assassination detail does make me want to go and redo all the gigs lethally now, just to see what it says here for different people. And of course, there's this hilarious piece of brilliance. So, all of this considered, I'm gonna name Jeopardy an A tier gig. Is it just me, or are each of Heywoods' gigs proving to have something really strong going for them thus far? Well, the next entry, Bring Me the Head of Gustavo Orta, definitely proves another strong entry with multiple layers of story padding. This job was commissioned by Nolan Frakes, a member of 6th Street, after his daughter, Martha Frakes, wound up in a coma, allegedly at the fault of Gustavo. Nolan has contacted Padre, who's commissioned us to break into Gustavo's building and, well, bring Nolan the head of Gustavo Orta. Sounds straightforward, but as always, the truth is a lot more complicated. If you unlocked the side quest Heroes, then Gustavo is yet another character whom we can encounter there and drink to Jackie with. Accompanying him that night though is a woman named Martha Young, whom it later turns out is of course Martha Frakes in disguise. The two share a forbidden love for one another, strongly mirroring Romeo and Juliet. Sometime after the offender, a burrito truck guy, Raul Franco, who was friends with Gustavo and we can find at an assault in progress over here, well, 6th Street had some leverage over this guy it seems and forced him to sell out Gustavo to them. This resulted in Gustavo and Martha being ambushed in a 6th Street shootout, with Martha getting shot instead of Gustavo. Now, Martha lies in a hospital bed with Gustavo desperately waiting for her to awaken. He sounds like a decent guy to be honest, and one I really don't feel like killing. Fortunately, we can indeed sort of avoid that. Coming up to his apartment, we'll find there's about 8 or so Valentinos standing between us and Gustavo. Fortunately, if we're a street kid, we can convince them to let us up, or if not, we can sneak in a bit more easily via the balcony instead. This will trigger a conversation with Gustavo where we can learn that really none of this was his fault, and he really does love Martha. This is made even clearer by the fact he's watching a live feed of her in the hospital to make sure she's okay, and we can learn from his terminal that he went to special efforts to have this thing installed. Also in here is a shard from Jose from the Tight Leash gig offering support for Gustavo. I mean damn, they really do like to flesh these guys out to more than just street level gangoons. So rather than killing Gustavo then, we can instead convince him to leave Night City, pointing out that getting himself killed will mean Martha has nobody to wake up to. And I guess that's it, all's well that ends well. Gustavo leaves for a while and at some undisclosed point in the future, he and Martha will ride off into the sunset together.
Gustavo Orta is dead, killed by his own hand. How did you get him to do it? Or actually no, don't tell me.
Oh crap, I forgot this is Cyberpunk, and this story is also a Romeo and Juliet parallel. Returning to Gustavo's lair again, we can indeed confirm that this isn't a cover-up, and quite what convinced Gustavo to do this, I can't quite put my finger on. It would have made a lot more sense for him to fake his own death, but coming off the Romeo and Juliet story again, I do wonder if maybe Gustavo saw something on this feed indicating that Martha had died. If that's the case, which would be poetic, I'm willing to bet that Martha didn't in fact die, but soon will when she wakes up to find Gustavo is already dead. Because that, point for point, is the story of Romeo and Juliet. Is it tragic? Of course, but do I respect it? Yes, I do. In fact, returning to find Gustavo like this allows us to loot one final shard from his body, detailing how he tried to hire a solo named Karubo to take out the 6th Street gangoons who got his girl. Funnily enough, we'll be encountering Karubo personally in the next gig. We can also see further how this has triggered a straight-up gang war between the Valentinos and 6th Street during this assault in progress in the Glen. Here, we learn that certain Valentinos are taking it upon themselves to stage assault on 6th Street, and we can also read on this shard that Martha was hit by no less than 7 bullets, 2 of which were to the head. Yeah, now I'd be less surprised to hear that she died in her coma, sadly. One final thing I did want to try though was non-lethally neutralizing Gustavo and taking him to the Fixer's car. He doesn't die this way, at least not immediately, and there may be a shred of hope that he can convince Nolan to spare him. On balance though, I really don't know about this. It'll probably result in Gustavo having a painful and undignified death, and part of me would just rather leave him to go out on his own terms. Comment below which you think is best. As for the gig though, the writing, attention to detail, and the fact that I was actually made to feel more attached to these characters than many others leaves us with another S tier gig. Now, whilst fixers usually take on jobs from other clients, we occasionally get a gig commissioned directly by the fixer themselves. Old Friends is one such gig, and Padre wants us to exact revenge on an old enemy of his who's recently returned to Night City, Karubo Beirai, the same guy Gustavo wanted to hire in the last gig to take out some members of 6th Street. He can be found at the Jacked and Cokes bar in Vista del Rey, and Padre has requested we do this job stealthily. Not exactly the easiest task when our path to him is sprawling with Valentinos. Though if you have 16 technical ability, it's much more of a walk in the park. Just come through the back entrance and drag this apparently skilled solo off into the night. But before you kill him or dump him in a boot to go to Padre, you'll want to look around some for a few nice tie-ins to other gigs. On this terminal here, we can learn that Karubo is actually old buddies with Royce, and it appears the two ran together back in the day. I wonder if Royce had a face back then, or I don't know, maybe he was just born this way. It's also made clear that Padre isn't Karubo's only enemy, with somebody named Banrai Azumaya also leaving threats for the guy. And on top of that, if we come to this assault in progress at an interchange out in the Badlands, we can find someone named Martha Liu, who also wants to kill Karubo herself for what he did to her and her family. Sadly, Militech got to her first. But what has Karubo done to all these people that's so very terrible? Well, if we read Karubo's half confession, we get a little insight. The man has killed, tortured, and raped countless innocents, and now he's hoping potentially for atonement for his sins. Sorry buddy, it just doesn't work like that. In a hilarious bit of world coloring, he's asked to pay an extra 10% to up his word count, though he might have trouble doing that given the number of people he seemingly already owes money to. So that's some extra nuance to Karubo, but also in this gig we can get a little more info on Jose Luis from a shard on one of the Valentinos. Looks as though he was trying to recruit somebody named Pilar for a job, most likely that same one for Arasaka. Now, before you get too excited that this is Pilar from Edgerunners, there's a bit of an issue there. The timelines do not stack up, like at all. No way could Pilar have still been around when they were gearing up for the Arasaka job. So either this is a very old shard relating to a different job, or more likely it's simply in reference to a different Pilar. Finally, we can lose a convo between Nolan Frakes and a merc named Xavi. Turns out Padre was not Nolan's first choice for taking out Gustavo Orta, and it was only once this Xavi refused the job on account of still having an NCPD bounty that Nolan considered Padre. Though I'm not certain Xavi is being totally honest about being able to do the gig, since another assault in progress in the Glen involves Xavi discussing with someone named Fatima the idea of stealing 2 cars from Jake Estevez. Yeah, honestly, the way every gig and scanner hustle seem to link together holistically somehow, I probably need to construct some sort of map with red string just to piece it all together accurately. Anyhow, interesting as this one is, and much as Karubo clearly is or was a strong presence within Night City according to shards and emails, I think the character of Karubo could ultimately have been used a little bit more, so I'm gonna give it a B+. Man, I love this one. It takes all that character building we've seen from Johnny and Carrie and ties it into a new and original little gig. It's also a nice break from the classic fighting gangs. The concept is simple. A guy named Gaston Slayton, who is appropriately labelled a Psychofan with regards to samurai and especially Carrie Uridine, is in possession of Kerry's prized guitar. Kerry wants the guitar back, and we just so happen to be the merc that Padre's hired for the job. Before we break into Slayton's apartment though, there's actually several encounters around North Oak which we can piece together to establish how Slayton actually acquired the guitar in the first place. So, climbing up and getting inside the O on the North Oak sign, we can loot a drone programmed to fly inside Kerry's house and steal various possessions of his, though clearly the items in question were too cumbersome for the little thing. So, when it came to stealing the guitar, Gaston employed a more hands-on approach. Just over the wall of the Uridine residence are 2 men clearly shot dead by Kerry's security bots. Reading the included shard, we can learn that these guys were paid a hefty sum of money to break into Kerry's heavily fortified place and steal his guitar. Kinda reminds me of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, just minus the hippies, pitbull, and a flamethrower. Anyway, despite these guys not making it, the job was evidently a success. Too bad we're about to make their sacrifice entirely in vain by stealing it back again. Down in the lobby of the building is a guy complaining about Gaston's obsession with samurai, and his final remark is pretty funny.
He knows the lyrics to every song, every release date of every album, every concert. Unbelievable. I can't wait for the day he drops dead.
Well, Gaston must be an extreme samurai fan to elicit that kind of hate. Heading inside, those with a high-tech skill can enter via the front door, but otherwise you'll have to go via the roof. Now, fair warning, triggering this camera will alert security, and you'll have to leave via the basement. Doing this is the only way to access the basement, but there's really nothing down there of note, so you don't have to do this. Best part of this gig, though, by far, is discussing with Johnny the stories behind the various samurai memorabilia this guy has plastered about the place.
Well, of course.
Well, I have to appreciate the man's taste in both music and liquor. But what I don't get, why the fixation on Carrie?
And I think Johnny seems a little jealous there that the obsession is with Kerry and not him. Also, make sure you don't miss this shard on the table, detailing an entire fanfiction between Johnny and Kerry. It's pretty long, so I'll leave you to read it for yourself, but I would highly recommend it. It perfectly captures that crappy, unsubtle mega fan vibe where the author is writing what they want to happen, but lacks the skill to implement it in a nuanced way. Gaston's also contacted Dino Dinovic, the city centre fixer, who's also got a musical history of his own. He's asked him to review a single of Gaston's knockoff band, Ronin. Get it? Because samurai? Anyway, it looks like Dino never replied. Now, come upstairs and you'll see Gaston has a frickin' shrine to Kerry hidden behind a locked door, and which of course houses Kerry's guitar as the main attraction.
Has a numeric keypad, so code's a string of digits. Man, I don't know. Maybe 69, 69, 69?
Now, to get inside, we could just disable the door via the terminal, but what's the fun in that? Let's figure out the code. Do make sure to read the terminal as always though, for quite a funny entry. It looks like Gaston has contacted plastic surgeons about making himself look more like Kerry Eurodyne. But in a plot twist that actually makes so much sense for Kerry's character, Kerry has actually copyrighted his biometric data and has a program monitoring CCTV for anybody who looks too much like him. Imagine if you were just a natural Eurodyne lookalike, would you then be forced to change your face? It's a weird future. Anyway, back to the code. That can be found on this picture that Gaston has with Kerry, no doubt from the best day of his life. And Detective Johnny over here suggests that the year 2065 might be the code. Makes sense. So with that, Kerry gets his guitar back and the natural order is restored. Brilliantly creative gig, which absolutely receives a solid S for Samurai. Now, this next one takes me back a bit personally, and for any of you who've been with this channel since back when I started frequent uploads in 2022, you'll remember I used this gig for pretty much all combat in my earlier videos. It's quite nice to be going back now and looking at it from a whole different angle. The Lord Giveth and Taketh Away is a run-of-the-mill vehicle theft over in Wellsprings. The story being that members of the Aldecaldos wanted to purchase this Militech vehicle from the Valentinos, but didn't think they needed to go through a fixer. As such, the Valentinos merely took their eddies and left them nothing to walk away with. After that, the Aldecaldos went to their local fixer, Dakota, and she contacted Padre to try and make things right. Enter V, who's now going to be relieving the Tinos of this SUV whether they like it or not. Business as usual, albeit this one's got a little less in terms of connections to the wider world. Now, Padre suggests we ought to leave the Valentinos be, but actually do this one stealthily or slaughter the whole area and it'll be the same outcome. So let's take these guys out to uncover the few hidden secrets in this place. First up, yet another reference to the looming war between 6th Street and the Valentinos. Turns out a guy named Francisco Gomez is in deep shit after killing a member of 6th Street for laughing in his face. In fact, if we listen closely here, we can hear that this guy, Diego Flores, is being ordered to kill Francisco for his mistake.
He fucked up. You gotta pick him up.
He's my chumbo.
Tied more closely to the gig itself are these terminal entries inside. First up, Sebastian Padre Ibarra, it turns out, didn't order us to do this job unprovoked. He actually gave them a chance to make things right, but when they told him to, quote, blow yourself, Grandpa, he calmly begged the Lord for forgiveness for what he would now do. Damn, this guy's a badass. Also, we can learn that the Valentinos have been using this SUV to actually pose as Militech in order to pull over other vehicles to, well, I guess, do crimes and shit. But unfortunately, for the last job, they forgot to clean some of the brain out from under the seat. Sounds to me like a Pulp Fiction reference, but let me know if it's actually in reference to something else. Anywho, steal the SUV and drive it across town to an Aldecaldo, and he'll explain why he wanted this thing in the first place.
Fucking love that Corpo Chic.
Wait, seriously?
Who guards the border?
Well, Militech.
Now connect the dots.
Yeah, it actually makes complete sense when you put it that way. We know from the Badlands gigs that nomads have issues with Militech all the time, so fair enough. And it's also a fair gig, with a little extra world building to it. Not as good as the other entries thus far in my opinion, but still worthy of a B-. This next gig taught me that in 2077, something actually exists called vehicular manslaughter insurance, i.e. certain people can be covered so comprehensively that they can actually run people over and get away with it.
Vehicular manslaughter insurance. What a world.
One such owner of said insurance is Tucker Albach, an ex-board member of Kuroshi Optics. You see, Tucker was driving through Night City drunk one night when she hit a young girl named Rosita Fushino. Instead of stopping and calling an ambulance though, Tucker simply kept driving, and thus Rosita was left to bleed out, despite the likely possibility that she'd have survived having received swift medical treatment. Rosita's father, understandably, wishes for Tucker to suffer a harsher punishment than she did, an eye for an eye and all that. After the incident, Tucker subsequently lost her position on the board, not for killing a young girl, but for potentially getting herself caught up in a crime whilst her vehicle possessed sensitive Kuroshi documents. This much we can read through terminal entries as usual inside her building, a place with 3 entrances. The front has a guard stationed, but you can enter through the back with 14 tech. Objectively though, climbing this ladder and then in through these shutters is the best way in, providing an almost uncontested path directly to Tucker. Breaking into her bedroom first though, we can almost smell the stench of corpo luxury. Some bizarrely decorated bed sits in the center, as well as weird glass sinks in the bathroom, which I actually think look kind of horrible in an overpriced way. On her terminal is a little more character padding, labeling her as a horrible person. First up, she gets irate that her custom cabinets won't be delivered on time due to the varnisher getting shot and ending up in the hospital. A classic Karen move taken to the extreme, if you ask me. Fortunately, she does get some just desserts though, with the subsequent emails explaining how she's lost her position, with a colleague, Hunter McPherson, gloating at how she bullied him for years, only for him now to inherit her position. Despite all this, when we meet the woman, it's clear that air of arrogance still very much persists.
An uninvited guest. I don't know who you are, but I know you're making a very, very big mistake.
You fucked up. Bad. Girl was poor, so you figured even the junkie on the corner wouldn't give 2 shits.
Slow down! What do you mean? What girl?
The one whose blood was all over your limo?
Oh, that! Whew! I thought one of my competitors sent you. Look, this is
I think it's finally time to take this one down a peg. Screw pacifism. Also, this facial expression is kind of goofy, but I think it's pretty satisfying to actually see this horrible woman realize that she isn't untouchable for once in her life. Now, she does of course try to bribe us, which we can take, but doing so will make Padre incredibly disappointed in us, and truly I can't see any argument why this piece of trash should deserve to escape justice. Also, the reward she offers us can still just be looted after we take an access token from her body. Plus, this way we get to read shards with even more info on the situation. In a more morbid variation of the speech from Taken, we can see that Marlon Fushino, Rosita's father, already issued a warning to Tucker as to what was coming, that being her death. Now, Tucker may not seem to care much about what she did, but the fact that this shard is still on her, as well as the fact she reported the threat to the NCPD, goes to suggest this might actually have her a little unnerved. Rightly so. Equally, you can steal Tucker's incapacitated body fairly easily through this window, delivering her to Padre for somebody else to administer justice, hopefully Rosita's father. It's up to you. After her death, she'll receive a plaque in the columbarium reading, quote, "She cruised through life like a battleship and never swerved from her path," end quote. It's just a shame that in her path was an innocent girl named Rosita. CDPR also included a little assault in progress tied to this gig next to the dam viewpoint. It covers the disposal of Tucker's car at the hands of a guy named Nazim Perlman. Nothing too major, just another example of scanner hustles offering supplementary flavor to the larger gigs. Normally, these assassination gigs are a little more grey, the characters we're sent to kill aren't wholly bad people, and it makes us question the morality of what we ourselves are doing. But I think on this occasion, providing a character as despicably dislikable as this, and still adding the option to take a bribe and let her live, I like it. It allows us to play more of a cold-hearted evil corpo rat if we want to, and I'm going to call this one an A tier gig. This next gig is called Senor Ladrillo's Private Collection, and involves heading over to and infiltrating the Dicky Twister Club. It's a classic thievery job, but with a little bit of a twist. A Dicky twist, you might say. You see, whilst we are kind of robbing Senor Ladrillo, or maybe Ladrillo, we're doing so for his own good, as Padre has become somehow aware that the Dicky Twister Club is due an imminent raid from the NCPD. Problem with this is that Ladrillo has recorded some pretty sensitive footage of various crime bosses, celebrities and others who no doubt wouldn't want their nefarious activities to see the light of day. We can see an example of this in the fifth column gig from earlier. According to Padre, this would turn a carefully established order to chaos, which wouldn't be in the interest of the district. Sure, Padre, I'm sure that's the full reason.
Today I feel gay.
Getting inside this one, you'll have to pay the reasonably cheap $100 entrance fee, but if you have a high enough tech skill, you can convince the guy at the front desk you're there to fix the sound system and get in for free. With that level of tech skill though, you may as well just enter via the back door instead, which, as you'd expect from a club called Dicky Twister, is the easier and less guarded way to go about the mission. Though do make sure to loot this side room in the main club at some point still for a potentially legendary item. For me, it was a muzzle, which is great as legendary tiers of these are exceptionally rare. Now, sneak through the back of the club to the upstairs overlook where we want to collect the data and maybe stealthily take out the Valentinos on the way. On this one is a shard with yet another reference to Jotaro Shobo, arguably the most talked about mini-boss in the game at this point, whom we can take out during the Monster Hunt gig in Kabuki. The shard discusses the disappearance of a guy named Steve, who it was last heard was going to meet Jotaro and earn some money. No doubt poor Steve wound up likely getting murdered in one of Jotaro's utterly screwed up XBDs. A fate suffered by far too many people. Actually, as a little Heywood bonus relating to Jotaro's operation, there's also an assault in progress over here in Wellsprings involving a guy named David Beamer who procures certain individuals for Jay Hune, a guy who would sell Jotaro people for his XBDs and whom we thankfully also take out in Kabuki. Sadly, it looks like the authorities know this stuff goes on, but think it's so unstoppable that they'd rather take bribes than actually do anything about it. Back to the gig though, and finally we'll come to the room upstairs, but rather than Senor Ladrillo looking out across his club, it's instead some dude named Saulo Capon. Taking him down and reading the terminal, we can learn that Ladrillo is out of town on some family business, leaving Saulo to, quote, keep an eye on things. It looks also like Ladrillo's been in contact with Jose Luis, offering him a seriously well-paid job. Given that this is likely a recent email, I'm willing to bet what that job is. Interesting that Arasaka would choose to go through Ladrillo, though to be fair, as a more prominent figure in society, he's probably an easy go-to guy for hiring other Valentinos. Finally, we can read that Ladrillo got in contact with an NCPD officer directly, complaining of one of them coming to his club with a search warrant. Looks like Ladrillo even has some dirt on the NCPD, threatening this guy with some tapes of him and, some minors. Yeah, looks like this club is a lot shadier than we thought, so best we steal the data and get out of there. There's also a locked door here needing an authorization shard, which I honestly could not find anywhere. Please, if anyone knows how to get in this room, comment below because I'm really curious about this one. Now, this club adds quite a lot of flavor to the world and provides a taste of the lawless corruption running rampant in this city. Perhaps we'll meet Senor Ladrillo somewhere, since he seems like a pretty well-connected member of society. As for the gig, much as I'm tempted to rank it D tier, because, you know, I think on balance, it's got all the makings of a B tier. Our final Sebastian Ibarra gig next, and honestly, I find it a little strange that he's reserved this very straightforward gig for top tier mercs only. Now perhaps it's only now that he trusts us to procure this pretty valuable item, or maybe it's that CDPR had a bunch more gigs planned at this tier, and the previous ones are simply greater in number as they allocated more time to working on them. I guess we'll never know, unless they add more. Anyway, for this one called Going Up or Down, we simply have to go into the basement of Mega Building H1 and procure some scandium rods that this maintenance guy, El Gallo, already stole from a corporation hoping to fix the building's elevator. The dude is sadly losing his marbles, and it appears the whole building knows that he has drug and mental issues. You'll want to tread carefully around him as he's incredibly volatile. In fact, this gig reminds me all too much of Backs Against the Wall in Kabuki, which unfortunately came to a tragic end. If we read this terminal nearby, we can learn that this guy was also in the military and is clearly not receiving the treatment he needs. Now, Militech claim he doesn't qualify for a veteran benefits package due to not submitting a specific form outlined in a very obscure passage of some contract he signed way back when. Example 5 million of bureaucracy being overly complex in order to exploit people. This also connects back to the documentary being produced by Max Jones in Northside on the mistreatment of vets, for which Militech placed a bounty on his head for bringing the truth to light. Now, there's no specific rewards for doing this gig in a certain way, and if you want to, you can avoid El Gallo entirely and sneakily steal the rods. Equally, you can try to reason with him, though the majority of options will ultimately trigger combat. He's way tougher than he looks, and was actually able to take out my Glass Cannon V with one punch. The building staff reckon he has the makings of a cyber psycho, which despite the lack of a boss health bar, I would wager he's defo in the early stages of. If you don't take him out quickly enough, he'll also turn out the lights, leading to an even more difficult and slightly terrifying fight thereafter.
Hey, who turned out the lights?
So, your best bet is to head down here a bit later in the game once you've leveled up that tech skill and cleverly explain that the scandium rods are not going to fix the problem that the elevator has. Despite still appearing pretty unhinged, he will part ways with them and let you leave without any bloodshed. It's no doubt the cleanest way to do this job, but I'm 90% certain that this guy is an imminent cyber psycho attack waiting to happen. Now, it's as much Militech's fault as his, and whilst he doesn't at all deserve to die, nor do the innocents who may end up caught in his path. Real tough one this, actually. Do we walk away and hope for the best, knowing we could nip a ticking time bomb in the bud here and now? Equally, the guy fought for his country and was a brilliant techie according to Padre, so do we want his blood on our hands? Let me know down below what you did or would do. Once the rods are delivered, Padre will be most impressed, and since you've completed his final gig, he'll reward you with Seraph, a Liberty variant with a compounding burn effect, which actually pairs nicely alongside Fenrir if you want to do a fire-based build. So for Padre's final gig, despite being a very quick in and out adventure, I think the underlying wider moral themes of the game that this one heavily leans into make it definitely a solid A+, which I think easily render Padre's gigs collectively the strongest entries on the whole thus far. But we'll see if Reyes or Dino can possibly beat such a strong list in the 2 remaining videos to come after this. Now though, let's top Heywood off with the one rogue gig which is unlocked last. So, over in Wellsprings, pretty late into the game at this point, Rogue will give us a call to take out one Rebecca Price. Rebecca, it seems, has been taking it upon herself to start selling stolen, jailbroken Militech equipment from out of her store. Now, in real life, when people are caught selling jailbroken equipment, the rich corporations just land them with fines way too big to ever pay off. But in 2077, Rogue reckons this is going to prompt Militech to send troops out onto the streets en masse, and thus decides it'll be a public service to have Rebecca quietly taken out. No doubt Militech snooping around would definitely cause some problems for the afterlife too. Now, this one had the potential to be a really awesome gig, but far as I can tell, CDPR screwed up incorporating one key detail, which we'll get to. But first, heading inside, we'll find that the place is occupied by the animals, who when prompted can be bought from, though they emit the bootlegged weapons in place of the content of a junk store. Clearly, the Militech stuff is meant for other clients. Clients all over the world apparently, according to this list found on one of the terminals. Pretty international operation running out of here. Rebecca must be one hell of a techie. Take out the animals upstairs and we can find a couple more references to wider gigs as usual. For example, there's a reference to Logan Garcia, a fighter who we'll get to in the next Hidden Secrets video covering Santo Domingo. Also, there's repeated mention of two guys named Robert Lyon and Ben Larkin. Now, Robert, from what I can tell, is a member of the animals, with Ben being one of Rebecca's team. Annoyingly, they aren't seemingly present for the gig, and I've been unable to find them elsewhere in the world. If either of these two names sound familiar from somewhere, then please, let me know. Finally, come to the basement, take out the one animal guarding Rebecca, and this I think is where there's a major bug. You see, Rebecca doesn't really engage in combat with us, but rather just stands there. Now, I reckon she was supposed to enter dialogue with us to provide more options for the gig, but doesn't. See, in the previous gig, El Gallo had to move to a certain position before dialogue became available, and it looks like the pathing for Rebecca just doesn't work properly in this regard. I'd imagine it's likely that there's an option to convince her to leave Night City instead, and by killing her or incapacitating her, because that's literally all you can do now, there's a shard as usual, explaining why she really definitely doesn't deserve to die. See, Rebecca isn't doing this for her own benefit, but rather she's being pressured by some unknown third party, whom it seems is holding somebody she loves. All we can tell about this mystery person threatening her though, is that they're an animal, referring to the other animals as their people, they're not adverse to taking fingers, and Rebecca owes them. So really, she's just a victim. Annoyingly, the most merciful option it seems then is to knock her out, send her to Rogue, and hope that Rogue instead shows mercy. Maybe even help take out the person pressuring Rebecca and get Rebecca to work for her. Though if you ask me, we may have just taken out this person already. Now, I may be very wrong here, and none of the names across the gigs match up to this, but this very much appears to match the MO of the animal loan shark Blake Croyle from the Shark in Water gig in Kabuki. He has a habit of seizing control of businesses and then running them into the ground in order to make a quick buck. Could make sense being him, but then again, I can't see why his identity would be kept secret on this shard. So maybe it was someone else, Sasquatch herself, or perhaps even somebody who will crop up in Phantom Liberty, who knows. What I do know is that this gig is definitely a bit bugged, and hopefully CDPR patch it before they stop working on this game, even if just to trigger combat properly. But for now, this gig, with a lot of potential, which sadly feels unfinished, gets just a B-. So let me know, as always, down below if there's any more hidden secrets, encounters, or scanner hustles I've missed that link these gigs together even further. I'll be wrapping up this series with 2 more videos covering Santo Domingo, then finally City Center, and by then there'll hopefully be plenty of stuff to talk about regarding Phantom Liberty as well. But these videos have given me plenty of ideas for some specific theory pieces too. For example, who is bad the Netrunner, which corporation is best to work for, and plenty more. So it's exciting times ahead. Huge thanks to my amazing patrons as ever for helping to keep this channel alive. Each of you guys are the absolute best, and anyone else interested can donate from £1 a month for early access to videos, your name in the credits, and more. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Heywoods gigs. I'm Bram, and I'll see you very soon in another video.